you describe very, very accurately that situation where there is nothing, you're sitting in the car, there's nothing for you to do, and you become aware of this subtle resistance to the current situation where there is no practical need for any resistance. So you become aware of the resistance, and then you become aware, you then judge that resistance, and you become aware of what is a resistance to your resistance, which is another layer of resistance. What is important not to do is to then try to change the second resistance into acceptance. Because that is just changing. It's a very subtle trick of the ego. The ego is made out of the first resistance. I don't like what is happening. It then reinforces itself by saying, I don't like the fact that I don't like what is happening. Yes? So the ego is, by ego I mean the separate self. It's made out of these, what is now two resistances. Then, when it begins to feel that it is being found out, it thinks, okay, I better change this second resistance into an activity called acceptance. It's a little bit more virtuous. It's a little bit more spiritual.
Yes.
And the separate self thereby subtly, and in fact not so subtly once we have seen it, perpetuates itself.
Yes.
So the resistance and acceptance are two ways in which the separate self perpetuates itself. What we're talking about is the openness that is the essential nature of awareness, ourself. Its nature is to be open, empty. In that sense, awareness, we could say, is like the space of this room. Its nature is to be empty. Acceptance is not something it practices. The space of this room, when we all start filing in here after dinner, it doesn't have to practice allowing each of us. It doesn't say, oh, I like the look of him, but I accept him, or I don't like the look of her, I resist her. In other words, the space is not negotiating experience. Accepting is its nature. It's what it is, not what it does. That's the important thing, to see that what we essentially are is already inherently and perfectly without resistance. Then, once we see that, we stand as that. We know ourselves as that. Then the mind is just left to do whatever it is doing, whether it's resisting, whether it's accepting, whatever it's doing. But it is no longer supported by our investment in it. And therefore, in time, without that support, it comes naturally to an end.
Yes.
The essential thing is to see that this acceptance is what we are, not what we do.
Yes, very important, yes. I would also say that when you were talking of the whole landscape, when there was nothing outside of experience, there was a great freedom, more a taste, if you like, of what you've just said. With going with that expansion,
yes.
I think you said once in one of your books that our real body is consciousness, and somehow to feel that there was nothing outside of this.
Yes, yes, exactly. If you think of what we normally think of as the body, we think of it as a kind of capsule in which all our experience is contained. It's made out of the skin. It's a kind of container defined by the skin in which experience takes place. So what is the real container of our experience? What does our experience really appear in? What do thoughts really appear in? Has any psychiatrist or neurologist ever found a thought in a brain or a mind? Indeed, have they ever found a mind? No. No. Thoughts appear in awareness, not in a brain. Sensations appear in awareness, not in a body. In fact, the body, our only experience of the body is a sensation or a perception. So yet the true body, in other words, the true container of our experience, is pure consciousness. This borderless field of pure knowing in which the landscape of experience appears. And ultimately, when we go on and explore it more deeply, out of which it is made.
This somehow also seems to enable things to take place, to happen without interfering or without guiding.
Yes. That's true. This understanding then has a visceral effect on the physical experience of the body. The body is and I'm talking now of the apparently physical body, that it is relieved of some of its tension, because most of the tensions, at least those that aren't required for practical purposes, most of the body's tensions are due to the fact that they serve a self which is not there. So when the true and only self of pure knowing is discovered, the body is progressively and gradually relieved of this network of tensions and contractions, and it returns to its original state, which is a state of openness, of sensitivity, lovingness.
I had in mind the analogy of the physical body. If you just lie on a beach and just leave it alone, you don't have any. There's no illusion about you are doing the breathing, or you are moving the blood, or anything else. And it's such a nice feeling that it can work by itself. But when you referred to the whole landscape, there was a similar feeling of events and everything. It can work by itself.
Yes.
And
just think now of how many billions of activities are taking place in your body.
yes, yes.
How many of those, even from a conventional point of view, do you feel you control?
None.
Even from the point of view of materialistic science, the belief that we control what takes place in the body is absurd. Now think of how many activities, chemical activities and reactions are taking place in this room, let alone the whole world. To believe that those activities are controlled by a self that is made out of a single thought and feeling, or a network of thoughts and feelings. I mean, it's absurd.
And then that makes great sense of your suggestion that you are just the knowing. If I heard you correctly.
Yes, you're just the knowing, but that's quite a lot to be.
Yes.
We say just that, but it turns out that all anybody has ever experienced is that knowing. So although we say just the knowing, that knowing in fact turns out to be everything.
Yes. Yes.
That's quite a lot to be, to know oneself as that. I mean, have you ever come in contact with anything other than the knowing of your experience?
This was quite clear when you were leading us through this. No.
No. I mean, could you ever come in contact with anything other than the knowing of your experience?
No.
Has anybody ever? Could anybody? No. All that is ever known is knowing. And it is knowing that knows knowing. everything that is known. Everything is contained in that and is made out of that. And that knowing itself cannot be partitioned up. It cannot be divided up into selves or objects. It's one infinite, dimensionless, indivisible field. It's only thought that divides it into a multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves. And it is only from the point of view of one of those thought-made selves that there is a multiplicity and diversity of objects and others. With that belief alone, the happiness and the peace that are inherent in our true nature is seemingly veiled, and as a result, the self that we believe and feel ourselves to be goes out into the world on a journey whose sole purpose is to recover the peace and happiness that seems to be missing. But the separate self that goes out into the world in search of happiness is like the character in the movie in search of the screen.
There's no chance of seeing this unless you resist nothing. Is that a proposition?
Put it the other way around. See this, and then see what happens to your resistance. In other words, don't make the absence of resistance a precondition for seeing this. Just go directly there. Don't worry about your resistance. That's why this is called a direct path. We just go straight to the heart of experience as directly as we can. And then from there, we look back and say to your resistance, how can you stand now?